Hello. Today I'm going to be reading two character introductions from Act 1 of The Crucible. So we've already gotten through a few. We read the long one in class where Proctor is introduced. We read the one where Rebecca Nurse is introduced. Today I'm going to read the one where Reverend Hale is introduced, and there's quite a lengthy introduction in your copy for most of you who have this edition. It starts on page 30 at the bottom of it, and we learn a lot about him as well as some background information about him. We've already watched the film in class, and so you know who this character is, but I think it's important that we read Arthur Miller's introduction of him as a character. And then there's a shorter one a few pages later for Giles Corey. I will talk about him when we get to that. What I'll do is I'll read this one for Reverend Hale, and then I'll pause the video. We'll go back to reading in class, and then if we get to the one for Giles Corey today, I'll play that as well. All right, so open up to page 30. And at the bottom of page 30 it says, "Enter Reverend John Hale of Beverly. Mr. Hale is nearing 40, a tight-skinned, eager-eyed intellectual. This is a beloved errand for him. On being called here to ascertain witchcraft, he felt the pride of the specialist, whose unique knowledge has at last been publicly called for. Like almost all men of learning, he spent a good deal of his time pondering the invisible world, especially since he had himself encountered a witch in his parish not long before." So remember, they call him in. I don't think it's a stretch for me to call him like the witch expert. He's the witch hunter, if you want to make it sound exciting. He's the one who they call in because he knows all the signs of witchcraft and things like that. So he himself had encountered a witch in his parish not long before. That woman, however, turned into a mere pest under his searching scrutiny, and the child she had allegedly been afflicting recovered her normal behavior after Hale had given her his kindness and a few days of rest in his own house. So this one experience he had with a witch, well, it wasn't really a witch, right? And the girl who had been afflicted by the witch got better with some rest. However, that experience never raised a doubt in his mind as to the reality of the underworld or the existence of Lucifer's many-faced lieutenants. And his belief is not to his discredit. Better minds than Hale's were, and still are, convinced that there is a society of spirits beyond our ken. Ken means beyond our ability to see and understand. One cannot help noting that one of his lines has never yet raised a laugh in any audience that has seen this play. It is his assurance that we cannot look to superstition in this. The devil is precise. Evidently, we are not quite certain even now whether diabolism is holy and not to be scoffed at. And it is no accident that we should be so bemused. Like Reverend Hale and others on this stage, we conceive the devil as a necessary part of a respectable view of cosmology. Ours is a divided empire, in which certain ideas and emotions and actions are of God, and their opposite are of Lucifer. It is as impossible for most men to conceive of a morality without sin as of an earth without sky. In other words, he's saying even now, today, we always have an opposite, right? We believe that our side is right, and there's an opposite side that is wrong. There's no in-between. Look at politics today, regardless of what side you're on. People look at the opposite side as evil incarnate, right? He's saying this is the same phenomenon that was happening then. This is ingrained in human nature, is what he's saying. Since 1692, a great but superficial change has wiped out God's beard and the devil's horns, but the world is still gripped between two diametrically opposed absolutes. The concept of unity, in which positive and negative are attributes of the same force, in which good and evil are relative, ever-changing, and always joined to the same phenomenon, such a concept is still reserved to the physical sciences and to the few who have grasped the history of ideas. When it is recalled that until the Christian era, the underworld was never regarded as a hostile area, and this comes up in my World Lit class, the underworld isn't hell in Greek mythology, for example. It's not where evil spirits go. That all gods were useful and essentially friendly to man despite occasional lapses. when we see the steady and methodical inculcation into humanity of the idea of man's worthlessness until redeemed, the necessity of the devil may become evident as a weapon designed and used time and time again in every age to whip men into a surrender to a particular church or church state. Our difficulty in believing the, for want of a better word, political inspiration of the devil is due in great part to the fact that he is called up and damned not only by our social antagonists, but by our own side, whatever it may be. The Catholic Church, through its Inquisition, is famous for cultivating Lucifer as the arch-fiend, but the Church's enemies relied no less upon the old boy to keep the human mind enthralled. Luther was himself accused of alliance with hell, and he in turn accused his enemies. To complicate matters further, he believed that he had had contact with the devil and had argued theology with him. I am not surprised at this, for at my own university a professor of history, a Lutheran by the way, used to assemble his graduate students, draw the shades, and commune in the classroom with Erasmus. He was never, to my knowledge, officially scoffed at for this, the reason being that the university officials, like most of us, are the children of a history which still sucks at the devil's teats. At this writing, only England has held back before the temptations of contemporary diabolism. In the countries of the communist ideology, remember, this was written about the Red Scare. This was written during the Cold War, during this time period where in America you were either American, or if you were a communist, you're anti-American, right? You're an un-American. So in the countries of the communist ideology, which are our opposite at this time, all resistance of any import is linked to the totally malign capitalist succubi. And in America, any man who is not reactionary in his views is open to the charge of alliance with the red hell. Political opposition thereby is given an inhumane overlay, which then justifies the abrogation of all normally applied customs of civilized intercourse. A political policy is equated with moral right, and the opposition to it with diabolical malevolence. Turn on any news station today, and you'll see that there is the side that the media is on, and then there's the opposite side. Whichever station it is, there's this belief that there's a right and a wrong, and there's no in between, right? Once such an equation is effectively made, society becomes a congery of plots and counterplots, and the main role of government changes from that of the arbiter to that of the scourge of God. The results of this process are no different now from what they ever were, except sometimes in the degree of cruelty inflicted, and not always even in that department. Normally, the actions and deeds of a man were all that society felt comfortable in judging. The secret intent of an action was left to the ministers, priests, and rabbis to deal with. When diabolism rises, however, actions are the least important manifests of the true nature of man. The devil, as Reverend Hale said, is a wily one, and until an hour before he fell, even God thought him beautiful in heaven. Ooh, hold on. Don't switch. Are you sure No, don't switch. A thing came up saying switch cameras? No, I don't want to do that. The analogy, however, seems to falter when one considers that while there were no witches then, there are communists and capitalists now. And in each camp there is a certain proof that spies of each side are working to undermine the other. But this is a snobbish objection, and not at all warranted by the facts. I have no doubt that people were communing with and even worshipping the devil in Salem. And if the whole truth could be known in this case, as it is in others, we should discover a regular and conventionalized propitiation of the dark spirit. One certain evidence of this is the confession of Tituba, the slave of Reverend Paris, and another is the behavior of the children who were known to have indulged in sorceries with her. In other words, he's saying these accusations don't come out of nowhere. There was an element who was trying to commune with the devil. These girls were dancing in the woods with Tituba conjuring spirits or attempting to. So he's saying there's some truth behind this. Whether they were really able to do that or not is beside the point, right? He's saying that this probably is coming out of somewhere. Just like in the modern times that he's writing, people being accused of communism. Well, communism did exist. It was an ideology that some people had. So there's some basis to these accusations. There are accounts of similar clatches in Europe where the daughters of the towns would assemble at night, and sometimes with fetishes, sometimes with a selected young man, give themselves to love with some bastardly results. The church, sharp-eyed, as it must be when gods long dead are brought to life, condemned these orgies as witchcraft, and interpreted them rightly as a resurgent of the Dionysiac forces that had crushed long before. It had crushed long before. So Dionysus was the Greek god of wine and revelry, and the other name for Dionysus is Bacchus. And there are these big orgies and parties in ancient Rome called a Bacchanalia, where everybody's drunk and doing all these crazy things. We talk about it in my World Lit class. And so here it's saying that, yes, the church had crushed these sorts of orgies and these drunken bacchanalias, but now they're coming back, right? And so the church had to crush it again. Sex, sin, and the devil were early linked, and so they continue to be in Salem and are today. From all accounts, there are no more puritanical mores in the world than those enforced by the communists in Russia, where women's fashions, for instance, are as prudent and all-covering as any American Baptist would desire. The divorce laws lay a tremendous responsibility on the father for the care of his children. Even the laxity of divorce regulations in the early years of the Revolution was undoubtedly a revulsion from the 19th century Victorian immobility of marriage and the consequent hypocrisy that developed from it. If for no other reason, a state so powerful, so jealous of the uniformity of its citizens, cannot long tolerate the atomization of a family. And yet, in American eyes at least, there remains the conviction that the Russian attitude toward women is lascivious, which means like lustful and sexual. It is the devil working again, just as he is working within the Slav who is shocked at the very idea of a woman's disrobing herself in a burlesque show. Our opposites are always robed in sexual sin, and it is not from this unconscious conviction that demonology gains both its attractive sensuality and its capacity to infuriate and frighten. My God, it's like he read the headlines today in 2018, and this is exactly what goes on in the world today. So, if you have no idea what I'm referencing, it's fine. Coming into Salem now, Reverend Hale conceives of himself much as a young doctor on his first call. His painfully acquired armory of symptoms, catchwords, and diagnostic procedures is now to be put to use at last. The road from Beverly is unusually busy this morning, and he has passed 100 rumors that make him smile at the ignorance of the yeomanry in this most precise science. In other words, all these people from Salem who were crying witchcraft, they're simpletons. He's the educated expert. He's the doctor of finding witches. He feels himself allied with the best minds of Europe, kings, philosophers, scientists, and ecclesiastics of all churches. His goal is light, goodness, and its preservation, and he knows the exaltation of the blessed, whose intelligence, sharpened by minute examinations of enormous tracts, is finally called upon to face what may be a bloody fight with the fiend himself. And that word, the fiend, being capitalized, he's talking about Satan, the great adversary, right? So finally, Reverend Hale is called on to use his witch expertise to solve this problem that before he hasn't had a chance to. So Arthur Miller does a really great job here of tying in the modern politics of the time at which he wrote this, but also we see it today, even 60 years after he wrote this, we see these same ideas and these same elements in today's society. So that went all the way to page 34. I'm going to skip ahead now to page 38. This one is short. We'll read, I'll pause the video, but we'll do this when we get to this point, this introduction of Giles Corey. All right, so here's Giles Corey. He's the one who, when we watched the film, I called him the OG in one of my classes. He's the old man he's this sort of cantankerous, crotchety old farmer. He's the one who goes to court and he says he's got the best training of anybody. He's been called before the court 33 times, not as a lawyer, but as a defendant, and he's been on the other side of the law. I really like Giles Corey. Old Giles must be spoken for, if only because his fate was to be so remarkable and so different from that of all the others. He was in his early 80s at this time and was the most comical hero in this history. No man has ever been blamed for so much. If a cow was missed, the first thought was to look for her around Corey's house. A fire blazing up at night brought suspicion of arson to his door. He didn't give a hoot for public opinion, and only in his last years after he married Martha did he bother much with the church. That she stopped his prayer is very probable, but he forgot to say that he'd only recently learned any prayers, and it didn't take much to make him stumble over them. He was a crank and a nuisance, but withal a deeply innocent and brave man. In court once, he was asked if it were true that he had been frightened by the strange behavior of a hog, and had said then he knew it to be the devil in an animal's shape. What frighted you? He was asked. He forgot everything but the word frighted, and instantly replied, I do not know that I ever spoke that word in my life. So he's this sort of cranky old man. Think about like your old out-of-touch grandpa who's just sort of stuck in his ways. That's Giles Corey, right? He's worked hard on the farm all his life. He's not much for book learning. He's a great character, and that's his brief introduction. So this has been a long video. We're going to get back to the play right now and see how much time we have left in class. All right, great job.